Thank you for joining another episode of Show and Tell Books. I'm Amber,
And I'm Chantel.
and today we're talking about Emily Henry. I'm really excited because at first I wasn't like the biggest fan of Emily Henry because I started reading her adult romance books this summer when like they blew up all over social media. But then I went back and read her back catalog of YA novels, and now I'm a huge fan. But her writing style has definitely changed.
It has a ton. I definitely agree. She has been around for a couple of years, but it wasn't till like COVID and BookTok blew her up that she hit the notoriety that she has today. And now everyone loves her books, right? She has Happy Place coming out here in a couple of months, and people are already like getting their advanced reader copies and raving about it and things like that. So it's been really fun going back into what her old books are and then comparing them with her new books now, and then seeing how much as an author she's grown. We're going to start with her first books and then just kind of go from there and kind of talk about some of the key points.
So, to start off, she published The Love That Split the World in January of 2016. And this is such an interesting book. I know that Chantel gave it a different rating than I did, and fairly, for a good reason. But to kind of give a quick synopsis, Natalie Cleary is in her last summer in her small town, but it's off to a memorable start. At first, she's seeing the wrong thing, like momentary glimpses at something's quite just not right. The front door of her house is a different color. It's the wrong business on the corner. But then her entire town starts disappearing for hours at a time, and she's revisited by the grandmother figure, which lends itself to help open up this love story because it really is a love story at its core. But Bo, her love interest, isn't necessarily from her time. And it's kind of a cross between Friday Night Lights and Time Traveler's Wife.
It's a good way to explain.
Yeah, and a look at like all the roads and paths that were left untaken. I don't want to give away too much of it, and I know that the rating, like teasing that I gave it a 5-star rating, and Chantel, I think, gave it what, 2 or 3 stars?
I give it a 3.
Gave it 3 stars. I'm guessing because the ending just left us like, what the F just happened?
Yes. It's a good book, and you get invested in the characters and their story. I really loved that the main female character is
a daughter of the First Nations is another way to say it.
Sure. But I really liked that she had a different perspective than what I obviously have, because I am not Native American. So it was really fascinating having a main character with that perspective. And like, that's how she addresses the world and goes through it. And then like the fears that come with, she's also adopted. So she doesn't know her birth mother. She had some abandonment issues with her birth mother. So I really, really appreciated the different perspective that the book brought. All the prophecies that I guess are in it are stories from different Native American tribes, which was really cool and very entertaining to learn more about, because I've heard of some of them, but definitely not to the extent and to all of the stories that were shared in the book. So that was really cool.
Yeah, I really loved the role that the grandmother figure played in talking about the creation of the world and like how this history impacts life and day-to-day choices a little bit, and like what you're supposed to learn from your ancestors. And I would say like overall the book had religious undertones. It's just not clear what those religious undertones are because there's such a broad exploration of them, because like, her best friend is religious and talks about believing in God and divine intervention type things, but Natalie herself doesn't necessarily say like, oh, this is what I believe. She's just kind of open to the idea that there could be a creator and that these creation stories possibly have impacted her life. I don't know, like
I thought it was really fascinating because Emily Henry bridged the gap on a complicated subject. Like, if you know Emily Henry and you've probably read her more recent books, they have nothing to do with really religion or the spiritual slash paranormal, I guess. And so I was really impressed for her debut novel to, one, touch on such controversial tones, let's say, but also she bridged the gap really well between, you know, a traditional Christian upbringing, which is what her friend has, and Natalie, who does not necessarily have that, but who also has the pulls of the Native American influence, and bridging the gap of what is God, what is our relationship with our ancestors and our past, and how does that impact who we are today and the choices that we make today.
Yeah. The other thing I really appreciated about this being, I would say, more of a new adult fiction than a young adult fiction is the exploration of male and female relationships. Emily took the opportunity to look at Natalie and her first boyfriend's relationship as childhood best friends that turned into high school sweethearts, and how that relationship came to an end because Natalie was choosing to leave their small town and go to an Ivy League school, but also like the pressure she felt from that relationship and the expectations that the town had around it and her friends and high school class, and also like her ex's hang up on it and kind of like unwillingness to move on from the relationship, but then to also introduce this new love interest in Bo and like the complexities at hand in the fact that they're on different timelines.
Yep. It was definitely really unique. I will say throughout the entire thing, I just kind of had the sense of like, what am I reading? Because I really, like, I guess Time Traveler's Wife meets Friday Night Lights is a really good way to explain it. But I really don't know another book that is like it, which I think is why I only ended up reading it 3 stars. And I think the fact that I read A Million Junes first slightly spoiled her debut novel for me. So we can talk about Million Junes next. So that was published in May of 2017. So this book is 6 years old. And it's about June. And June kind of is different in that she sees spirits, I guess you could say, not in the traditional sense of ghosts, more like forms or like orbs or things like that. And whenever she sees one particular one, she always knows that something bad is going to happen. It got reinforced a couple of years prior when she saw this black orb and her dad died. And so ever since, whenever she sees the black orb, she always gets kind of worried because it's always like a portent, I think is the word.
Bad omen. I don't know.
A bad omen, yep, of like things that are to come. Anyway, so the book starts out with June seeing this black orb, and she kind of just is like, no, I didn't actually see it. It was a shadow, like trying to talk herself out of it. And she goes to a carnival. And while she's at the carnival, she meets this guy who's back in town, and his name's Saul. And her family and his family do not get along. Think Romeo and Juliet, right? This is kind of, I guess, like a modern day retelling in a way of Romeo and Juliet. Mm-hmm. And they hit it off. They have a lot of chemistry and they start to like each other. However, obviously their families cannot know about this because they do not get along. Anyway, so I guess A Million Junes is about the story of Saul and June growing closer together, and also both dealing with different traumas that they've had in their personal lives. So like June lost her dad and Saul lost his sister to cancer, I want to say, while also the ghosts and the spirits are trying to send them a message about saving someone. So it's really like Million Junes is probably one of my most favorite books I've ever read. It was haunting and powerful and just beautiful and not at all like any of Emily Henry's other books.
Yeah, it's a great exploration into grief and multi-generational trauma, and like it reminds me of the Hatfield and McCoys more than Romeo and Juliet, but like that's the US history buff side of me coming out. Because it does impact like how the town views these families, and every time something bad happens to Saul's family, something bad happens to June's family, and it all goes back to like generations ago when a daughter from her family and a son from his family, I think, entered into a relationship when the parents didn't approve. And so like, just like Chantel said, haunting and beautiful and substantial in that it makes grief personal. Whether you've experienced loss on that level or not, you can relate to those characters so deeply that you feel their pain and you feel like how difficult it is for them to move forward, to overcome it, to let it go. And that's,
Yep.
and the ending was just so beautiful. Just, but it also had that spiritual undertones, which I thought was really interesting, that her first two books dealt so heavily with kind of the what comes after life or what comes before life topics, where I'd say none of her other books have touched on it. And easily you can tell that her early writing was heavily influenced by the question of what comes next, or what if this happened instead.
I think it also, they both dealt heavily with like, what is our relationship with the other, let's say, whatever you personally believe of like if spirits exist or not, right? But her first two books very much deal with like, there are interactions with other beings of some form or shape, and what is our relationship with them, and how can they help us, I guess, live a better life, because we don't know what comes next because of the what if of after death. One thing I loved about Million Junes is it like sucks you in. I have never, like, it made me laugh all the time. It made me bawl my eyes out at certain points. And really, I loved it because at the end of it, you know, I just like shut the book and I just had so much peace over it, which is such a weird concept to think about when you're reading a book, but like it came to such a good conclusion. And it just, I don't know, like sometimes you just shut books or like you finish them and you're like, that was right. And like the end, I guess. And I highly, highly recommend reading A Million Junes.
It's by far my favorite of her books that I've read. And
I think so too.
I look forward to reading it again. I don't know that I'm to the level of saying like, oh, I would sell my soul to read this book again for the first time, because I don't really love that concept. But if I was going to choose a book, it would probably be A Million Junes.
I think A Million Junes is a book I will continue to think about probably for the rest of my life because of how impactful it was. And for a YA book, because I would label this as a YA book, that is mind-blowing that it was that profound and that personal and powerful and just beautiful.
Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about When the Sky Fell on Splendor. The common thread through these first three novels, though, is that element of grief. When the Sky Fell on Splendor, it's different. Like, it's about teenagers who were impacted by a tragic event in the town where they lost various family members in a mill accident. And the main character and her brother have to deal with the loss of their brother, who was injured in the accident and in a coma for 5 years, and also the abandonment of their mother, who couldn't deal with the loss of that child and the strain on the relationships in the family, and so she left. And so like the grief that's surrounding this group of friends because of the incident made them feel kind of left behind from the town, by the town, because they're the ones who survived, or they're the ones who experienced this firsthand loss so personally, but then nobody knew how to interact with them. So they clung to each other and formed this friend group that they call the Ordinary. And one night they're out filming a YouTube video or whatever and have an extraterrestrial visitation, I guess. Right. And it's just an odd story and an odd, like, Chantel texted me like, what the F just happened when she read the ending of Love That Split the World? And I was thinking, what the F is happening the entire time I read this book?
Full disclosure, I have not read this one, nor am I actually planning to, simply because Amber was like, this is weird.
It was odd, but true to Emily Henry's first books, it was really the exploration of this relationship with the other. And it's turns out that the extraterrestrial being that they thought visited them was actually like the spirit of people that were lost and trying to communicate with the ones that they loved. And I thought that was an interesting way to go about it. You know, it's like it's hard to kind of categorize these first three novels, right? Because I don't paranormal or like doesn't feel quite right. Cozy doesn't feel quite right. Like,
and spiritual also doesn't quite feel right, right? Like, I guess paranormal in the sense that there is an other and it's interaction, right? Which is tricky because when I think paranormal, I think like mythological.
Well, like, yeah, like
yes, werewolves and vampires and all of that, right? Thank you, Twilight. So I guess in the strict sense of like ghost hunters kind of concept, it would be paranormal.
If I had to rank them, When the Sky Fell on Splendor is obviously my least favorite book because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it because I'm not a sci-fi person in general. Like I tend to avoid sci-fi, but this is I guess a sci-fi read.
We'll jump into the next book, which starts the era of Emily Henry that everybody knows and is the transition into her adult books. So we've got in 2020, Beach Read was published. And that kind of tells the story of January, who is an author who's trying to write her fifth book, and she's not having any motivation whatsoever to do it because she no longer believes in happily ever afters, since she found out at her dad's funeral that he was having an affair with some person, some lady, and her mom knew about this and didn't tell her. So she's obviously crushed and heartbroken because the perfect picture that she painted of her parents, that was a lot of peas, is now ruined and spoiled. So now she has to like write this book, kind of try and figure out what she's doing with her personal life while she's at this beach house that her dad stayed at with this other woman. And to make matters worse, in addition to kind of dealing with the trauma of her dad and his life-altering revelation, her next door neighbor is her writing nemesis from college, Augustus Everett, and they had like a drunken almost one night stand back in college. So obviously there's some chemistry between these two, even if they are rivals. So they start getting to know each other once again as like adults, and it all starts like their relationship, I guess, starts because they both like dare each other to write a book in the other person's genre. Since they're both struggling with their writing, they're like, all right, well, why don't you write like a women's fiction book and I'll write a, how does she describe it? Like a coldly horny serial killer kind of book.
Yeah.
Because that's what Everett writes. So that's what Beach Read is. It's about their story of like stepping outside their comfort zones, both like dealing with trauma of abandonment, or in, you know, January's case of like crushed dreams in a way, and them and their relationship together as they kind of work through it.
Yeah, I just want to note that this was published on March 19th of 2020, so right before shutdowns. And that kind of alters a few of the things that I put a lens on this, because I didn't read it until like almost 2 years after it was published. So I think how I viewed it and like rationalized some of the behavior was post-COVID lens, when really it shouldn't have been. And so that it's interesting how publication dates kind of impact our reading experience, right?
Yeah.
I actually really liked Beach Read. I liked it more than her next novel because I liked the challenge that they gave each other, right? Like they almost forced each other out of their comfort zones and then pushed each other a little bit, in my opinion, not enough to develop and like move past their traumas and kind of move forward. But there was that element of that, like, I see you, I see what you're struggling with. Let me encourage you through it.
And I'm the opposite. Beach Read is my least favorite of the three post-COVID books that Emily Henry has published. I am also in the middle of rereading it. I'm at like 60% because so many of my friends love it so much that I'm trying to give it a second chance. One thing I do also agree with that I do appreciate is like Gus and January do push each other exactly like you said. But I love that they both repeatedly are there for the other person when they break, let's say,
Yeah.
right? Or when it becomes too much. And I think that is really beautiful in their relationship is like, I'm going to push you because I know you can be better or because I know that it's hard. But I'm also a safety net for you. And I mean, that is what a relationship should be. One thing I mentioned to Amber since I am rereading it is I had forgotten how much January uses alcohol as a coping mechanism, especially throughout like the first 40% of the book. I understand that she's dealing with a lot of trauma and like having to confront the fact that her dad had an affair and all of this stuff. But when I mentioned this to Amber, Amber was like, well, maybe it was like in a way addressing what a lot of people went through during COVID of the loneliness and the isolation and the confronting of who we are and the ugly truth of maybe not being where we want to be, which sounded like a valid parallel until just barely when I realized this was written prior to COVID and just published during COVID.
Yeah. And barely into COVID, like a week into COVID. So
yeah.
I feel like I was willing to give her that character flaw and that like red flag in the storytelling if it was that parallel, but it's not. And so I'm less willing to justify that behavior, which is super interesting. Can we also just talk about how the marketing of this book just left me unsatisfied because it's called Beach Read. So you're like, oh, it's going to be about or it's like a story or something related to a beach read, but really it's about the books that you take on a trip with you, like a vacation read. And I felt like the cover art and the marketing that surrounded this, just expectations over here and what we got was over here. Which brings us to People We Meet on Vacation, which is kind of what I was expecting Beach Read to be. And I didn't love People We Meet on Vacation. Poppy and Alex, they're best friends that met in college, freshman year, and have been each other's person, but they never dated in college. And Poppy becomes like a lifestyle travel blogger. And gets some opportunities to travel the world, and she takes Alex with her, and on one of those trips they cross the line. But the way that
not in the way you think.
Right. But the way Emily Henry like told this story is through flashbacks. So you have present day Poppy dealing with the loss of their relationship because it was altered from this one vacation, but you don't know what happened or how because she's going back 5 years or 10 years or however long it was, I don't really remember, to develop their relationship and tell the story and tell why they're in the rocky place that they are. And Poppy tricks Alex to go on one last vacation with her, kind of. It forces them to face what they need to tell each other and forces them to communicate. But my one takeaway is that Poppy had a pregnancy scare in college, and Alex's response was to go out and get a vasectomy. That's literally like the only part of this book that really stayed with me, is that he saw his friend in a situation she didn't want to be in. So he was like, well, I could do that to someone else. I don't want to do that to someone else. I'm going to be responsible and go get a vasectomy. So there's that.
Which is so funny. People We Meet on Vacation is one of my favorite books, mainly because I see myself in Poppy so much. Like a lot of her lifestyle, a lot of what she does is literally what I do in real life. So I really like it. And like you said, right, it is kind of tricky timeline wise in that like one chapter is them on this last trip trying to mend their relationship. And then the next chapter will be a flashback to a prior trip that they'd gone on. And I really actually liked that Emily Henry did this slightly confusing timeline simply because the backstories in the flashback tell such a vivid story and also it lends more context to their current tension. And I think it's just beautifully done because each prior vacation plays a factor into their current predicament. Emily Henry masterfully writes it to the point where like she gives you just enough present day drama to be like, okay, what happened to cause this, right? And then she dangles another piece of bait. And so you keep going because you want to know what happened to cause this giant rift that led to like 5-ish years of them not talking to each other after decades of being friends. I think it is a really well done best friends to lovers romance, because a lot of times best friends to lovers is like nauseatingly in love. And that's not the case with this, right? It's more understanding that you are my person. And there is a love in there, and there is like the chemistry and the attraction, but it's a lot more based on their relationship with one another as best friends than a lot of traditional best friends to lovers romances are.
Which brings us to Book Lovers,
which is my absolute favorite. I actually own this physical copy of the book, and I don't buy books unless I fully love them. And so like the fact that I have Book Lovers should tell you how much I genuinely love this book. So Book Lovers is the story of Nora and Charlie. Nora and Charlie do not get along. They are book publishing rivals. They met each other one time years ago, and it did not go well, right? She was running late because she just got broken up with. Nora's thing is that she's not the leading lady in anything. She's the one who gets left behind because you meet the like, leading lady. And they just butt heads. Ever since then, they do not like each other. Anyway, so fast forward, Nora's on vacation with her sister in this tiny town called Sunshine. While she's there, she runs into Charlie. They start kind of falling in love, despite both knowing that it's not a good idea in the long run.
The other thing I loved about Book Lovers is the importance books and a bookshop played in Charlie and Nora's childhoods. So Charlie's helping run his family's bookshop while he's in this small town, and he has some hard feelings about that. Nora's mother loved a bookshop that they lived above, if I remember right, in the city, and like the relationship that the girls had with that bookshop impacted them deeply, and it's probably one of the reasons Nora is in publishing is because of her love of books from her mom. So I loved like the common thread there and how it helped them get over their dislike for each other and like move forward.
And it's also cool because Nora, right, she is in publishing. But back in the day, she actually wanted to become an editor, which is what Charlie does. So it's also her coming to terms with like, is she where she wanted to be, and is she in the dream job? Or did she end up choosing publishing because it was secure enough that, you know, she could support her sister and her family, and she never had to like really risk anything. So I think that's also like a cool undertone of it, of that like we all can relate to, right? Are we in a career or a situation or a relationship or anything where we just kind of settled, for lack of a better word, right? Where there was no risk. There was like, it just worked out, but it might not be necessarily what we want, which now that I look at it and think and like line up all of the books that she's written, that's kind of like an overall theme of what Emily Henry really does well is, you know, challenging her female main characters to look at where they're at and see if it's where they want or if it's not. And Emily Henry also does a fantastic job, more so than a lot of authors, at having her characters heal from trauma. Amber and I have had multiple conversations. You know, trauma is obviously always a concept that is discussed in books because it is something that all of us have. But we've had a lot of pet peeves because whenever a relationship is introduced when someone is healing from a trauma, a lot of times the male character or the significant other tries to just fix the problem as opposed to helping the character work through it. And I love that Emily Henry does not do that in any of her books, right? A lot of times both her male and female characters are going through a trauma, and so they're helping the other person heal alongside of them. But even if they're not, like her main character's love interest is helping the main character actually heal.
A lot of romance authors in particular use sex as a band-aid for these kind of traumas or experiences of like, oh, his magic ability to deliver an orgasm solves all of her problems. And Emily Henry doesn't do that, like Chantel said. It's actually developing a relationship that is healthy and encourages each other and recognizes, hey, yeah, you're broken. I see your brokenness. Let's work on it together if you want.
She is the epitome of what romantic literature should be, in the sense that you can have smut in the book. And her adult books do have smut, right? But the smut and the sex is not used as a replacement for a good plot.
Yeah.
Like, these are, take away the smut, take away the like sex scenes, and they have an actually healthy relationship where they're working with each other, they're exhibiting green flag behaviors that we all should emulate in our personal relationships, as opposed to a lot of other BookTok books that became popular. They just use smut as a substitute.
Emily Henry did such a good job of not making it about what was selling books, of that escapism and focus on sexual relations, but maintained like a focus on telling a story, telling a love story where they have to develop a deeper relationship. Although I love that in Book Lovers, Nora's longest relationship is the one with her Peloton, basically. Like, she's yes. obsessed with her Peloton. And I just thought Emily did such a great job of introducing humor through that lens, and like, oh, everyone's on this craze of exercising because of the pandemic. So it's kind of a reference to the real world and what's going on without actually calling out, oh, COVID changed our lives, right?
They will go down as books people reread. Whereas I feel like a lot of books that were published during COVID that are BookTok books or smut books, you really won't go back to, simply because they don't necessarily leave you feeling satisfied by the plot or the characters. She's got Happy Place coming out here in April of this year.
When I first saw the teaser for this book, I was hoping for kind of another Book Lovers, where it's something that you relate to. I was a little worried that it might have kind of the college romance aspects that people we meet on vacation had. But as people have talked more about like needing to be in the right headspace to read this, because it was heavier than what they have previously read from her, and then having read her first books, I'm really excited, because I think there's a lot of potential for her to take what we loved about A Million Junes and put it in an adult romance and bridge that gap. And I have high expectations. I hope I haven't built it up too much in my head.
I cannot wait for Happy Place to be published.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about Emily Henry, one of our favorite authors. She's definitely on our always buy list or always read list. If you liked this video, please comment and let us know what you think of her writing, or if there's another author we should check out.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.
Terrible.